"Daniel, HR would like to speak with you." That was the sentence that finally made my husband look small, and I remember thinking how strange it was that humiliation could feel so quiet. 2 nights earlier, I had stood beside him in a ballroom glowing with chandeliers and crystal glasses, believing I was walking into one of the proudest evenings of my career. I had worked at Whitmore Financial for 27 years. I had stayed late, trained junior analysts, built client portfolios from scratch, and survived 3 restructurings. The annual executive gala was not just another party to me. It was a milestone. I was being recognized for my long-term leadership, and for the first time in years, I asked Daniel to come as my guest. I chose a silver-gray gown that brushed just above my ankles, elegant but understated, the kind of dress that doesn't beg for attention but earns it. Daniel had adjusted his tie in the mirror and said, "You look stunning, Ev." I believed him. I wanted to believe that at 70, after 42 years of marriage, we were still a team. The ballroom at the Lakeside Grand Hotel overlooked the water, the skyline reflecting against the dark surface like a second city beneath us. There were white linen tablecloths, polished silverware, and soft jazz drifting from a quartet near the stage. I introduced Daniel to colleagues who had heard about him for decades. "This is my husband," I said, and I felt proud saying it. For the first hour, everything was effortless. We clinked glasses. We laughed. Then I noticed Monica Reed standing a little too close to him. Monica was my direct supervisor, polished, charismatic, the kind of woman who never seemed to wrinkle or sweat. She placed her hand lightly on Daniel's arm as she laughed at something he said. It was a small gesture. Almost nothing. But her hand didn't move away. I watched from across the table as Daniel leaned in, closer than necessary, his body angled toward her in a way I had not seen directed at me in years. I told myself I was imagining it. After all, this was a professional event. People mingled. They chatted. They networked. Still, there was a look exchanged between them that did not belong in a ballroom filled with colleagues. It belonged somewhere private. I stood there holding my champagne glass long. After the bubbles had faded. No one said anything to me. No one needed to. I saw 2 associates glance at each other and then at me. I smiled as if nothing were unusual. I have learned, over a lifetime, that dignity is sometimes the only thing you truly control. Later that evening, when the award presentation began, Daniel was no longer at our table. Monica wasn't either. I checked my phone and found a short message. "Heading out. Don't wait up." That was all. No explanation. No apology. Just a statement. I walked up to the stage when my name was called, accepted my plaque, and thanked the company for the honor. My voice did not tremble. My hands did not shake. I drove home alone, the city lights blurring past the windshield, and I realized something had shifted. Not just in my marriage. In me. I did not cry. I did not call him. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark and replayed every glance, every laugh, every subtle touch I had dismissed over the past year. And when HR called me the next morning asking if I could come in early to clarify a concern, I understood that whatever had begun as a quiet betrayal at a gala was about to unfold in full daylight. I woke up the next morning to a silence that was so thick it felt suffocating. The house was still, almost too still, as if it had already accepted that nothing would ever be the same. I got up from the bed and walked down the hallway, each step echoing in the emptiness. The smell of the coffee I had made the night before still lingered in the kitchen, untouched. I didn't feel hungry. I didn't feel anything. I hadn't slept much, not that I cared to sleep anymore. I stood there for a while, staring at the coffee machine, my thoughts circling back to the events of the night before. The way Daniel had disappeared with Monica. The way he had not even bothered to say goodbye. I knew something had changed in him, but I had never imagined it would be like this. The thought made my chest tighten, and I shook it off. I didn't have the luxury of feeling sorry for myself. I couldn't let myself fall apart. Not yet. The phone rang. It was the office. I had known the call would come. I had just hoped it would be something trivial, a forgotten email or a misplaced file. Instead, it was Monica, asking if I could come in early to meet with HR. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my voice steady. I'll be there in an hour. As I hung up the phone, the reality of what was happening began to sink in. I had always known there was something off about Monica and Daniel. There had been whispers over the years, small things I had dismissed, convinced that I was just being paranoid. The way she would smile a little too brightly whenever she saw him, the lingering touches, the way he would talk about her like she was his equal, not his employee. I had pushed all of it aside, telling myself it was nothing. But last night, everything had come crashing down. I had always been the strong one, the one who held the family together. I had spent my life making sure everyone around me was taken care of, that their needs were met. I had raised 2 children, supported my husband's career, and sacrificed my own ambitions to make sure the family came first. I had put my dreams on hold so that everyone else could chase theirs. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten to take care of myself. I had become so wrapped up in being everything to everyone that I had lost sight of the fact that I was a person, too. Now, here I was, standing at the edge of a life I didn't recognize, unsure of what came next. The meeting with HR was awkward, to say the least. Monica sat across from me, her eyes cold and unfeeling, while the HR representative tried to mask his discomfort with forced politeness. The entire conversation felt rehearsed, like a scene from a play I had never agreed to be a part of. They spoke about conduct and company values, but all I could focus on was the way Monica's fingers tapped nervously on the table. She was trying to control the situation, to make me believe that this was just a misunderstanding. But I knew better. I had seen the way she looked at Daniel, the way he had looked at her. There was no mistaking it. They had been playing a game, and I had been the fool. I had spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect colleague. But perfection was a lie. And I had been living that lie for far too long. As the meeting wrapped up, I walked out of the office with my head held high. I didn't know what the next step would be, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. I needed to take control of my life again. I needed to stop pretending that everything was fine. The door to the office closed behind me, and I stood there for a moment, taking in the weight of what had just happened. My world had been shattered, but I was still standing. And for the first time in years, I realized that maybe that was enough. I drove home in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me with each passing mile. The streets blurred as I navigated the familiar route, but I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. I wasn't sure what to expect when I walked into the house, but I had already made up my mind. This was not just about Monica. This was about Daniel too. I had spent decades of my life supporting him, putting his career first, all the while neglecting my own. Now, it was clear to me that I had been invisible to him. I parked the car and sat for a moment, the engine idling. I didn't want to face him, not yet. The house felt too big, too empty without the familiar hum of his presence. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The door creaked as I opened it, and the silence hit me again. There were no sounds of footsteps, no voices, no noise at all. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock. I set my purse down on the counter and called out, "Daniel." There was no response. I walked through the house, checking the rooms, but he wasn't home. I knew where he was. The realization was suffocating, like a cloud of smoke that I couldn't escape. He was with her, Monica. I didn't need to ask. I had seen enough to know that the bond between them was not just professional. It was personal. I walked into the living room and stood in front of the bookshelf. My fingers brushed against the spines of the books Daniel and I had picked out together. Books we had read to our children, books we had discussed late into the night after a glass of wine. The memories seemed like another lifetime, a time when I was still important to him. I felt a pang of loss, a sorrow that didn't seem to belong to the present. It felt like mourning something that had already died. I went to the kitchen and started making myself a cup of tea, the familiar routine comforting in its normality. But everything felt different now. The kettle whistled, and I poured the hot water over the tea bag, watching as the liquid turned amber. I took a sip, but it tasted like nothing. I set the cup down and grabbed my phone. I didn't want to check his messages, but I had to know. I couldn't be in the dark any longer. The screen lit up with a message from Monica. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't easy, but Daniel and I have decided to take things to the next level. Please understand. We've been seeing each other for months now, and I don't want to keep hiding it anymore." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I should have expected it, but seeing it in writing made it real. My hands shook as I read the message again. This wasn't just an affair. This was something they had been planning. And I had been living a lie. I sat down on the couch, staring at the screen in disbelief. I felt numb, like the world had stopped moving. I had been so focused on keeping everything together, on making sure everyone else was happy, that I hadn't seen the cracks forming beneath the surface. I had given everything to this marriage, to this family, and in return, I had been betrayed. The anger started to build in me, but it wasn't the kind of anger that makes you lash out. It was the quiet, controlled anger of someone who has been wronged. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg for his attention or affection. I was done with that. What I needed now was justice. I picked up the phone again and called my lawyer. The decision was made. I was done. This marriage was over. There was no turning back. I would fight for what was mine. I would take control of my life once and for all. I woke up the next morning with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The anger from the night before had settled into something deeper, something more resolute. As I looked out the window, I realized that I wasn't just angry at Daniel or Monica, I was angry at myself. For years, I had put everyone else first. My family. My work. My marriage. And in return, I had allowed myself to be neglected, to be invisible. But now, I was done. I was no longer going to let their lies control my life. I made the decision to take charge, to finally prioritize myself. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life, my independence, my dignity. I went to the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and sat down at the table, my mind racing. I had already contacted my lawyer the night before. I wasn't going to let them dictate the terms of this divorce. I had worked hard for everything I had, and I wasn't going to let Monica waltz in and take what was rightfully mine. I knew what I had to do, but I still wasn't sure how I was going to face Daniel. He wasn't home when I woke up, which was just as well. I didn't need to see him just yet. I had a plan, and I wasn't going to let my emotions get in the way of it. I spent the morning preparing. I called the bank to make sure everything was in order. I checked the accounts, made sure my name was still on everything, and set up a meeting with a financial advisor. I knew the next step was going to be difficult, but I had to be ready. Daniel and I had shared everything for years, our home, our finances, our lives. But now, it was all about to change. I wasn't going to be left with nothing. When Daniel came home later that afternoon, I was ready. He walked in, his face already flushed with guilt, like he knew what was coming. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "I don't want to hear it," I said, my voice steady. "I know everything, Daniel. I've known for a while, actually. The lies. The deceit. The affair. You can't hide it from me anymore." His face paled, and for a moment, I saw the guilt and fear in his eyes, but I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anything for him anymore. I had nothing left for him. Evelyn, he started, but I cut him off. No. You don't get to explain yourself. You don't get to talk your way out of this. You've made your choice, and so have I. I'm done. He looked at me, confused, and then his gaze shifted to the paperwork I had laid out on the table. The divorce papers, the property agreements, everything I needed to make sure I wouldn't lose a single thing. What is this? He asked, his voice shaky. This is the end, Daniel. The end of us. You can't keep playing the victim. You've been lying to me for months, and I've had enough. His eyes widened, and for the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the man I had once known. The man who had promised to love and protect me. But it was too late. That man no longer existed. Evelyn, please. Let's talk about this. We can fix this. We can make it right. No, Daniel, I said, my voice cold, final. You've made your choice, and I'm making mine. I'm leaving. I'm taking control of my life, and I'm not going to let you or Monica ruin it anymore. I stood up, walking toward the door. I've already started the process. The lawyers are involved. You're not going to take everything from me. I turned back one last time, looking at the man who had once been my partner. I deserve better than this. I deserve more than you. And with that, I walked out of the room, not looking back. The sound of the door closing behind me felt final, like the last chapter of a book I was done reading. I spent the next few days in a haze of paperwork and phone calls, feeling as if the world had shifted beneath me, and I was now treading water in a place I didn't recognize. I had always been the one to handle everything, financial matters, family decisions, and even the things Daniel never bothered to address. Now, it was all on me. I had to make sure the house was in my name, that my retirement accounts remained intact, and that my future wasn't suddenly in jeopardy because of someone else's mistakes. The lawyer's office was cold, sterile, and efficient. I signed the papers, nodded along as they explained the terms, but I couldn't bring myself to care about the legal jargon. All I could think about was what I was walking away from. The life I had built with Daniel. The years we had spent together, the years I had sacrificed for him, for us. I thought about the house we had raised our children in, the memories we had created in every room, and now, it was all falling apart. I felt numb, but also strangely empowered. I wasn't sure if it was anger or strength that fueled me, but I was no longer the woman who waited for things to get better. I had decided that I was going to make them better on my own terms. When I got home, the house felt even emptier than before. Daniel hadn't returned yet. I was sure he was with Monica, probably making up excuses for his absence, pretending like he hadn't just shattered everything we had worked for. It didn't matter anymore. I was done. I went to the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and sat in the quiet. The silence was different now. It was no longer a peaceful calm, it was a reminder of everything that had been lost. But it was also the space I needed to think clearly, to realize that I had survived worse. I had lost loved ones, I had faced hardships that I thought I would never get through, and here I was, still standing. This was no different. It would take time, but I would rebuild my life, and this time, it would be for me. The doorbell rang, and for a moment, I froze. I didn't know who it could be. It was too early for Daniel to be home, and Monica had no reason to come here. I stood up and walked to the door. When I opened it, there stood my son, Matthew. He looked at me with a mixture of concern and confusion, his face drawn tight. "Mom," he said softly, stepping inside, "I heard about what happened with Dad." I don't know what to say. I looked at him for a moment, unsure of how to respond. My relationship with Matthew had always been complicated. He had grown distant over the years, too busy with his own life to really care about what was happening at home. But seeing him now, standing in front of me, I realized that he was still my son, and this was still my family. You don't have to say anything, Matthew, I replied, my voice steady, though there was a slight crack in it. I've made my peace with it. He looked down at the floor, clearly uncomfortable, and then sighed. I should have been here sooner, Mom. I don't know why I wasn't. I've been caught up in my own world, I guess. He paused, looking up at me. But I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. I felt a lump form in my throat. I hadn't realized how much I had needed to hear that. Matthew had always been the one to follow in his father's footsteps, to seek approval from him, and I had come to accept that our relationship would always be a little strained. But now, in this moment, I saw a glimpse of the son I had raised. A son who still cared. He might not have been there for me when I needed him most, but at least he was here now. Thank you, Matthew, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I appreciate it. More than you know. He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, we shared a moment of quiet understanding. It wasn't a fix, it wasn't a resolution, but it was a step in the right direction. And right now, that was enough. I sat in the quiet of the living room, staring at the walls that had once been filled with life and laughter. The furniture was still arranged the way Daniel liked it, the cushions on the couch just a little too firm, the bookshelves lined up with the novels we had both read and discussed. It felt like a home that was no longer mine, a place that had been overtaken by memories of a life I no longer recognized. I knew I had to take the next step, but it was harder than I imagined. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and saw the name of my lawyer, Angela. I took a deep breath before answering. Evelyn, I've gone through everything. We have everything we need to move forward with the divorce. But there's one thing I need to ask you before we proceed, Angela said. What about the house? Are you planning to keep it, or are you willing to let Daniel have it? The question hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The house had been our home for so long. Daniel and I had bought it together, renovated it, and made it a place for our family to grow. It held memories of the life we had built, the children we had raised, and the love we had once shared. But now, it was just a house. It didn't feel like home anymore. I'll keep it, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I've lived here for over 20 years, and I'm not leaving. It's mine. Angela was quiet for a moment before responding. All right, we'll make sure that's part of the settlement. But you know that this won't be easy, right? Daniel won't just let go of it without a fight. I nodded, even though Angela couldn't see me. I knew she was right. Daniel would fight me for everything, but I wasn't going to let him take what was mine. I wasn't going to let him control my life any longer. I'm ready for whatever comes next, I said, my voice steady. I've had enough of being the one who sacrifices, the one who puts everyone else first. This is my time now. Angela chuckled softly. I can hear the strength in your voice, Evelyn. We're going to get this done. After we hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't over yet, but it felt like I was finally on the path to reclaiming my life. I had spent too many years being invisible, too many years trying to fix things that weren't my fault. Now, I was going to fix myself. The next few days were a blur of meetings with lawyers, paperwork, and phone calls. I met with a financial advisor to make sure I wasn't walking into a trap, and I began sorting through the memories in the house. It was time to let go of the things that no longer served me. I packed away the photo albums, the knickknacks that reminded me of a time when I thought everything was perfect. I kept a few things, the vase Daniel had bought me on our anniversary, a picture of our kids from when they were young, but most of it went into boxes. It was a strange feeling, packing up the life I had spent decades building. But I didn't feel sadness. I felt empowerment. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something for myself. I was no longer living for Daniel or anyone else. I was living for me. The day I officially filed for divorce, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't the end I had imagined, but it was a new beginning. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready. For the first time in years, I was in control of my own destiny. I had spent weeks going over everything, each step feeling like I was slowly, methodically, piecing my life back together. The divorce was finalized, and the house was officially mine. I had won the legal battle, but the emotional one was far from over. I could still feel the presence of Daniel and Monica everywhere I looked. The house, now just a structure with 4 walls, was a constant reminder of everything I had lost. But also everything I had gained. I had reclaimed my life, and that thought was both liberating and terrifying. I didn't know what my future would look like, but I knew it wouldn't include them. The kids hadn't been around much, and though I told myself it was just their busy lives taking over, I couldn't help but feel the distance between us growing wider. Matthew had been distant since the divorce, and even though he had promised to be there for me, I hadn't seen much of him since. I wasn't sure what was going through his mind, but I could feel the tension whenever we did speak. The phone rang, breaking my thoughts. I checked the caller ID and saw it was Matthew. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mom," he said, his voice unsure. I've been meaning to come over. I've just been caught up with work." I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "It's okay, Matthew," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I understand. I know you're busy." "No, it's not that," he said quickly. "I want to make it right. I've been thinking about everything that happened. I've been a terrible son, and I haven't been there for you when you needed me. I don't know how to fix it." His words struck me, and for a moment, I felt the sting of old wounds reopening. But this time, instead of wallowing in sadness, I felt something different. I felt relief. Relief that he was finally acknowledging what had been left unsaid for so long. "Matthew, you don't have to fix anything," I said softly, my voice steady. "I've learned to live for myself now. I don't need anyone to save me. I just need you to be there when you can. That's all." There was silence on the other end of the line, and I knew he was processing my words. "I will, Mom. I promise," he said, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like there was a glimmer of hope that things could get better between us. As the days passed, I started to adjust to the new rhythm of my life. I spent my mornings working on my projects, the things I had pushed aside for so many years. I enrolled in a painting class, something I had always wanted to try, and slowly began to rediscover the woman I had once been before becoming consumed by my marriage and motherhood. But even as I embraced my newfound independence, there were still moments when the silence of the house felt deafening. The nights were the hardest. I would sit in the living room, the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the windows, and I would think about the life I had left behind. The life that had once been filled with love, laughter, and promises that had now turned into nothing more than empty memories. I still loved Daniel, in some way. But I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to move on, for my sake. And for my children's sake. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a photo album, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I froze. I hadn't seen Daniel since the day the divorce was finalized. I opened the door cautiously, and there he stood, looking older than I remembered. His hair was graying, and his face had a sadness to it that I hadn't seen before. "Evelyn," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" "Evelyn," Daniel said again, his voice softer now. "Can we talk?" I stood there for a moment, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face and walk away from everything. But another part of me, the part that had spent so many years loving him, was still there, lingering, trying to make sense of it all. I took a deep breath and stepped back, letting him in. I didn't want to do this. I had told myself I was done with him, that I wouldn't let him back into my life. But something about the way he stood there, so vulnerable, made me pause. We walked to the living room, and he sat down on the couch, his hands resting in his lap, his posture slumped, as though he was already defeated. I sat across from him, keeping a careful distance between us. The silence stretched out, both of us unsure of how to start. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," he said, finally breaking the stillness. "I know I've hurt you, and I can't take that back. I wish I could, but I can't." I looked at him, searching his eyes for any sign of sincerity. There was a time when I would have believed him without question, when I would have forgiven him for anything. But now, after everything that had happened, I wasn't so sure. "You hurt me, Daniel," I said, my voice steady but firm. "And not just with Monica. You hurt me with every lie, every time you ignored me, every time I put you and our family first while you were living your own life." His eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't let myself feel sorry for him. He had chosen his path, and now he had to live with the consequences. "I don't know what happened to us," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know when it all went wrong. I never wanted to hurt you. I still love you, Evelyn. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "You love me?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "After everything? After what you've done?" He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I never wanted to hurt you," he repeated. "But I've hurt you more than I can ever fix, I know that. I've ruined everything, and I don't know how to make it right." I sat back, my mind swirling with emotions. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to think that this was the man I had married, the man who had promised me everything. But the other part of me, the stronger part, knew that I couldn't go back. I couldn't keep living in a cycle of betrayal and disappointment. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Daniel," I said quietly. "I don't know if I even want to try." He looked up at me, his face desperate, his eyes pleading. "Please, Evelyn. I'll do anything. I just want to fix this." I shook my head slowly. "You can't fix this. You can't fix what's been broken for so long. What you did isn't something I can just forget. And I can't keep living like this, pretending everything is okay when it's not." He reached out to take my hand, but I pulled away. I didn't want his touch anymore. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry for everything." "I know you are," I said, my voice cold now. "But sorry doesn't change anything. I've given you my whole life, Daniel, and in the end, it wasn't enough. You chose her. And I need to choose me now." He didn't say anything more. He just sat there, looking at me with a mix of regret and sorrow. And I realized, in that moment, that I was done. There was nothing left to say. The man I had loved for so long was no longer the same person, and I couldn't keep holding on to the past. I had to let go. For the first time in years, I stood up, walked out of the room, and left him behind. The days that followed were filled with small, deliberate steps towards something that resembled healing. I couldn't say I felt whole again, but I wasn't as broken as I had been when Daniel had left that day. The silence in the house didn't sting like it used to. Instead, it was a reminder of my strength, of how I was learning to navigate this new life on my own terms. I spent my mornings in the small studio I had set up in the back of the house, working on my paintings, something I hadn't done in years. The first few brushstrokes felt foreign, as though I were trying to remember how to do something I had once loved. But soon, the strokes began to flow more easily, and the canvas began to fill with color. It was therapeutic, a way for me to express all the emotions I hadn't been able to put into words. It was also a way to take back a part of myself that had been buried for far too long. One evening, as I was cleaning up my brushes, I heard the sound of the doorbell ringing. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I hesitated. But when I opened the door, there stood Matthew. His eyes were tired, and his posture was stiff, but there was a sincerity in his gaze that made me pause. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice soft. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. And I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I know I haven't been the best son, and I know I've let you down. But I'm here now, and I want to do better. I felt a tightness in my chest, a mixture of relief and sadness. I hadn't realized how much I had needed to hear those words, how much I had longed for Matthew to finally acknowledge the distance between us. It's okay, Matthew, I said, my voice steady. I understand. You've had your own life to live, and I've had mine. But I'm glad you're here now. He smiled faintly, but there was an unease in his eyes. I've been thinking about Dad too. And I don't get it, Mom. How could he do this to you? To all of us? The question hung in the air, and I didn't have an immediate answer. I had spent so many years convincing myself that everything was fine, that our family was intact, that I had failed to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. But now, I had to face the truth. Daniel had made his choice, and so had I. I don't know, Matthew, I replied. I spent so many years trying to keep everything together, trying to hold the family together. But in the end, it wasn't enough. And I'm starting to realize that it's okay. I can be okay on my own. Matthew seemed to absorb my words, his expression softening. I admire you, Mom. I really do. You've always been strong, even when I wasn't around. I want to be there for you now. And I appreciate that, I said, smiling. I really do. We stood there for a moment, the silence between us no longer uncomfortable but filled with understanding. It wasn't the perfect resolution, but it was a start. Matthew wasn't the boy I had raised, and I wasn't the woman I had been before everything fell apart. But in that moment, I realized that maybe that was okay. Life had a way of reshaping you, of showing you parts of yourself you didn't know were there. And as I looked at my son, standing in front of me, I knew that we had both grown in ways we couldn't have imagined before. Do you want some coffee? I asked, gesturing towards the kitchen. Matthew nodded, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the beginnings of peace settle into my bones. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was ready to face it. On my own terms.